So we have had an opportunity to review 8 videotapes, 2 Atlanta body cam tapes, 2 Atlanta Police Department dash cam tapes. We have also had an opportunity to review a Wendy's surveillance tape. We have also viewed 3 citizen cell phone videos. With many of the videos, we had the opportunity to enhance the videos so that we could get a better look. The other thing that we have had an opportunity to do is to view some of the physical evidence. The Chevrolet Trailblazer was a vehicle that was in the line at Wendy's on the night of this incident, and it received a shot from Officer Rolfe's gun. We've had an opportunity, along with the GBI now, to view that Trailblazer. My office has had an opportunity to inspect the crime scene. We have conducted a canvass of the area. We started our investigation at about 1:15 a.m. on Saturday morning, and we have been working on this case around the clock since that time. Never presented himself as a threat. At the very beginning, he was peacefully sleeping in his car. After he was awakened by the officer, he was cooperative, and he was directed to move his car to another location. He calmly moved his car. Mr. Brooks was asked whether or not he had a weapon. He indicated that he did not. Without any resistance, he passed his driver's license to the officers, and the officers then asked Mr. Brooks whether or not he would consent to a pat-down or a body search, and Mr. Brooks allowed them to search him, and the search yielded no weapon. We found that it was of interest that when the officers patted Mr. Brooks down, they noticed there was a bulge in his pants. They did not pull that item out of his pocket. They took Mr. Brooks's word that that bulge represented a number of dollar bills. But Mr. Brooks never displayed any aggressive behavior during the 41 minutes and 17 seconds. Once Mr. Brooks was shot, there is an Atlanta policy that requires that the officers have to provide timely medical attention to Mr. Brooks or to anyone who is injured. But after Mr. Brooks was shot, for some period of 2 minutes and 12 seconds, there was no medical attention applied to Mr. Brooks. What we discovered is during the 2 minutes and 12 seconds that Officer Rolfe actually kicked Mr. Brooks while he laid on the ground. They're fighting for his life. Secondly, from the videotape, we were able to see that the other officer, Officer Brosnan, actually stood on Mr. Brooks's shoulders while he was there struggling for his life. We were able to conclude that based on the way that these officers conducted themselves while Mr. Brooks was lying there, that the demeanor of the officers immediately after the shooting did not reflect any fear or danger of Mr. Brooks, but their actions really reflected other kinds of emotions. So as we are drawing our legal conclusion in this case, we were led by the 2 foundational cases in this matter, one being Tennessee versus Garner. And what that case points out is when an officer is pursuing a fleeing suspect, that the officer may not use deadly force to prevent escape unless the officer has probable cause to believe that the suspect poses an immediate threat of death or of serious physical injury to that officer. The next foundational case that we used in our analysis is Graham versus Garner, which says that this test is based upon that of a reasonable officer on the scene and not the individual officer, but a reasonable officer on the scene. We've concluded at the time Mr. Brooks was shot that he did not pose an immediate threat of death. So in addition to our findings, as many of you all already know, that the Atlanta mayor, Mayor Keisha Bottoms, and the police department concluded that Officer Rolfe's actions were excessive and in violation of APD's SOP. There's an SOP, I believe it's 4.1.1, and after their analysis that the actions were excessive, Officer Rolfe was fired. We have also concluded that Rolfe was aware that the taser in Brooks's possession, that it was fired twice. And once it's fired twice, it presented no danger to him or to any other persons. Now, we have had something quite remarkable to happen in this case, and it involves the testimony of the other officer, Devin Brosnan, because Officer Brosnan has now become a state's witness. He has decided to testify on behalf of the state. What he has said to us, that is within a matter of days, he plans to make a statement regarding the culpability of Officer Rolfe. But he indicated that he is not psychologically willing to give that statement today. So these are the charges that we have had filed today, signed by one of our Superior Court judges. These are the 11 charges against Officer Rolfe. The first charge is felony murder. This is the death that is as a result of a underlying felony, and in this case, the underlying felony is aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and the possible sentences for a felony murder conviction with life without parole or the death penalty. Now, he's also charged in the arrest warrant with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and this is a count charging him for the shooting of Mr. Brooks, and the possible sentence for aggravated assault is 1 to 20 years. The third aggravated assault account, shooting are in the direction of Mr. Melvin Evans. Mr. Evans was the person who was seated in the car, and these are the charges for Officer Brosnan, and there are a total of 3 charges. And the first charge is for aggravated assault, and this is for standing or stepping on Mr. Brooks's shoulder. The possible sentence for this crime is 1 to 20 years. And this is a photograph of Officer Brosnan, who you can see to the right. And at the time of the photograph, he is standing on the body of Mr. Brooks. And as I've indicated earlier in our conversations with Officer Brosnan, he has admitted that he stood on the body of Mr. Brooks. He said he believes that he was standing on Mr. Brooks's arm, but that is what the photograph shows. We've also charged him with additionally 2 violations of oath. One is for the standing on the shoulder. That is an unauthorized weaponless control technique which the city of Atlanta prohibits. And the second violation of oath was for the failure to render timely medical aid to Mr. Brooks. And so with count 4 against Miss Officer Rolfe. It charges him with aggravated assault for firing the weapon in or in the direction of Danielle Killians, who was in the passenger side of the front seat of the car. Next slide. Count 5 is an aggravated assault charge, and this was a charge for shooting towards or in the direction of Michael Perkins. Mr. Perkins was seated in the rear of this same vehicle at that time. There's a charge for criminal damage for shooting into that vehicle. Also, Officer Rolfe is charged with 7 violations of office. Each one of those carries a 1 to 5 sentence. These are violations of his oath of office for the city of Atlanta, arresting Mr. Brooks for the DUI without immediately informing him of the arrests, shooting a taser at Mr. Brooks while he was running away, which again is a violation of Atlanta's own SOP. Thirdly, excessive force when shooting a firearm at Mr. Brooks. And number 4 is the failure to render timely medical aid. Those are the 4 violations of oath. The 8th is for kicking Mr. Brooks, and the possible sentence for kicking Mr. Brooks is from 1 to 20 years.